Good morning. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. We're going to go ahead and call the budget planning workshop for February 21st to order. We're going to open the meeting with prayer. We are very fortunate to have Pastor Rogers here with us. And Pastor, if you'll come forward and lead us in a word of prayer, I'll ask Commissioner Cole to lead us in the pledge after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we pray together? Our Father, we come humbly before you this morning, asking, Lord, for a special touch of your grace and wisdom and mercy, Lord, upon this group of commissioners. Lord, their intent is to help our county. Lord, just give them the wisdom of Solomon, that they may make decisions that will please you and be betterment for everyone involved. Lord, we ask you and we thank you, Lord, for your continued blessings upon this county and upon the leadership of the county. Just be honored and glorified today, and we'll thank you in the wonderful name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you again, Pastor, and thank you so much to everybody that was able to make it out today. I wanted to take a moment real quick before our county administrator gets us started on the budget and capital discussions, just to, I know not every commissioner was able to attend. I know y'all keep extremely busy schedules, but Monday we had a ribbon cutting there at Florida Town Park, and that was so recent it didn't even make it in the update on the budget of some of the lost projects. But I just wanted to say it was a joy to get to see probably 75, 80 kids out there playing and having fun, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity, and the community wouldn't have had that opportunity if it wasn't for the support of my fellow commissioners and the hard work of staff. So I just wanted to show my gratitude this morning and say thank you for that. Dan?
Good morning, commissioners. It's our annual planning workshop, focused on the budget primarily, but we're going to talk about some other things too, organizational and capital improvement. And then also Jane's going to talk to us about courthouse funding. And I'll give you a brief update where we are on that, and hope to have a contract for you on the agenda next week. We're finalizing that right now. Let's see. So like we did last year, I think it worked pretty well. We're going to take a look back how FY18 went. I know Jane gave you an update at a board meeting last month, but just take a snapshot look at FY18, where we are with FY19 and what decisions we made that we're executing now in the current year budget, and then the factors that we're looking at going into FY20 and the next several years, and really with the capital we're looking almost 10 years out, and so that's the layout for the morning. We'll answer questions as they come up. Jane and I will be down here. We figured it's easier for you to throw things at us this direction here as opposed to, if we're sitting over there. So Jane, if you'll come up, we'll start with sort of the review and the highlights of FY19.
Good morning. Good morning. Y'all, this is a visual from the briefing that I gave you all last month. You can see that our general fund revenues exceeded our budget by 4.4, which is wonderful. And our expenditures were less than budget, but a big reason for that were the unfinished projects. Our local option sales tax was, our revenues were 8.5, $500,000 of that was more than what we budgeted. And our ad valorem lapse rate was 1.67%, but overall we probably saw a lapse rate of around 5, considering all revenues. And you can also take a look at our major revenue budget variances, and they're pleasing, with the exception, of course, of our local half-cent sales tax. And the reason for that is that the state has been discounting the collections, and that affects us. However, the local option sales tax that we collect, it does not affect that. So, but that's a snap of that. Now, our highlights for 19, we did have a step increase. We implemented our salary survey. The sheriff added 18 new positions, $1.8 million he also had in raises. We allocated $3.6 million for lost for public safety, and $6.8 million of loss we committed to transportation and drainage. And the general fund capital requests were funded from the capital fund, and in the road and bridge fund, the capital was funded from reserves and lost. Okay, as far as our total expenditures go, last year we had $40.6 million was budgeted for the sheriff, and this year his budget was nearly $46 million. That, of course, was primarily the new deputies and the raises. There was a little bit of an uptick in his operations as well, and there was quite a jump in our general fund from approximately $38 million to $48 million, but in that number is our courthouse. We had, which was $5 million. We had our salary survey, our merit increase. We moved code enforcement to general fund, so that can easily be explained. And the road and bridge, they were pretty static. What helped road and bridge this year was some lost funding for their capital. In the personnel, of course, the sheriff's uptick was the added deputies and the raises. And for the general fund and road and bridge, it was also our merit and the salary surveys. Okay. In operating, the big uptick, of course, in general fund, we did move code enforcement, and also the $5 million that we did allocate for the courthouse design is in this number because it is held in reserves until it is spent. It will then be considered capital. And we did have some heavy repair and maintenance expenses as well. The sheriff, his operating expenses only went up a bit. And the reason why we see a fall in the road and bridge is because these are actual compared to budgeted. And we actually budgeted $6.8 million for road and bridge, and we have budgeted this year 8.1. However, in that actual number, we had some rollovers for quite a bit for Camden drainage, and there was some lap work as well. Okay. Capital expenditures, the jump in the general fund is because that includes the geothermal system of $2.5 million that we are doing for the jail. And the sheriff is down because last year we had $344,000 for capital from the general fund. This year we only have $140,000. Okay.
So some of these are the same factors that we considered last year in the planning workshop. The gas tax revenues, according to the state, are flat or maybe even slightly decreasing. That is of concern because that is our funding source for the road and bridge department. Last year, we added some general fund revenue to the road and bridge, just a small amount to that because of the pay increases that were made, but that's something that we're going to have to pay attention to this year again. It might be might have to take the same steps this year with the road and bridge budget. Capital needs exceed the available revenue. We know that there are more needs out there, and then we're going to have to make some cuts in the capital area and the capital requests. The Local Option Sales Tax Citizen Committee will meet next month. One of the primary issues is going to be cars for the Sheriff's Department. He spoke to that committee in November, and I spoke with the sheriff yesterday prior to this, and one of those driving factors is the school safety and the additional officers that are required there, and every new officer means a vehicle. So that will be a factor that we have to address on the capital needs this year. The other known is that when we spoke last year about responding to the salary survey and implementing a plan, that it would take 3 years. So we're looking at the second year of implementation to address the salary survey that we got that showed our workforce was behind the market by an average of about 27%. The raises that were approved last year by you went a long way towards correcting that. The average for our workforce was about a 12% pay raise, but for the folks in our workforce, the majority of our workforce, over 60%, saw an average of a 16% raise because we focused those dollars that you approved at the lower ranges of our pay scale, and that had a significant impact. So we will continue to address that.
Commissioner Cole.
Do you want to address questions as they come, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I had one for, back on the review of fiscal year 18 highlights. Explain to me the local option, or the local half-cent sales tax. Jane, you said something about what the state was doing, and I didn't
Yes,
quite,
in fact,
didn't quite understand
in fact,
that.
Mike Burton can help also. He was the one, they have discounted their collections. You know, they have a 6%, but they have
Okay.
discounted it to 5.7, and we feel that discount. They're cutting themselves as well.
Okay.
So, but it does not affect our local option sales tax that we collect of the
And I guess I'm still a little lost. The
There's a-
state discounts this?
There's a state half cent that they share with the local governments,
Okay.
and then there's our infrastructure sales tax. So
Sure.
Jane's talking about the state shared half cent.
Okay,
that
and
comes to
now
us.
how are they, what do you mean by discounting it? You're losing me. They're still collecting the same amount of money. So what the term discount, I guess, has got me a
I don't know
little
that
bit lost.
I don't know that they are, they, Mike. I mean,
If I could-
they're not collecting the same amount, I don't believe.
Jane, if I could, the state last year lowered the tax rate on commercial rental property to 5.7%, the state tax, so that would have reduced the overall taxes that they collected.
Okay.
They lowered it to 5.8 2 years ago, and then they lowered it to 5.7 starting
Okay.
January 1st
And
of this
I
year.
think just the term discount is where you lost me on.
They
that.
just lowered the rate on commercial rentals.
Okay.
And I'm not sure about short-term residential, but I know commercial rentals, they lowered the tax rate on.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing was, Dan, something you just brought up, oh, no, has there been any discussion as of yet with the group, the, citizens group on the half-cent local option about a possible increase to a full cent? Or has that not been in discussion yet?
I mentioned it in discussion with the committee in November when we met, just to point out the fact that the current half-cent sales tax is programmed. It's all allocated. There are projects identified. And in the case of the sheriff's requests, there are going to be more requests than there is funding remaining in the current local option sales tax. So we meet again next month, I think March 22nd, 26th, with that group, and we'll be talking further about that then. And really, it'll be a decision that committee has to recommend to you all how to handle that, because those funds are fully allocated.
Okay, all right, thank you, appreciate it.
Some of the unknowns, we've been very fortunate the last several years on health insurance premiums. We've been able to continue to provide that health insurance benefit to our employees at no cost to the employee. They do pay an additional amount if they add their family to our health care plan, but that's a significant benefit. But we've been very fortunate to see only minor increases that we've been able to absorb, but we don't know how long that's going to continue. Medicaid changes, we aren't hearing anything right now, but that's one that hit us several years ago. So we just want to pay attention to that. And any other legislative mandates that are considered in Tallahassee that would send a bill our way. And we're paying close attention with our lobbyists to any of those preemption or tax sort of bills in Tallahassee. We assume we want to maintain our same level of service. I'll talk to you about a couple of areas where maybe we want to add some service. We want to, again, provide a raise for our employees, and I'm going to talk specifically about year 2 implementation and what that might look like. And then additional personnel positions would be considered on a case-by-case basis. I've asked the directors to tell me what they need, but I think the personnel additions are going to be few, and they need to be targeted.
Thank you. This is a bit of a look back and a look forward. If you'll see that fiscal year 18 are actual numbers, our fiscal year 19 are what we've budgeted, and fiscal year 20 through 23 are what we have forecast. In fiscal year 19, you can see up there at the cash carry forward that it's 11 million. Keep in mind that 3 million of that are unfinished projects that we've carried forward, and 5 million of that is our courthouse. If you drop down to the capital outlay, you'll see a 3.1. That looks a little heavy. That is our geothermal system of 2.5 million. And also our other uses, and that's 6.7. The 5 million of the courthouse design is in there. There's retirement payouts are in there. Our 457 match is also in there. For fiscal year 20 through 23, the 3.5 million that you see in the other uses, that includes our courthouse that we have budgeted for. Also note that the amount of carry forward that we use each year going forward to balance the budget also is declining, which is a very good sign. And you can see the assumptions that I've made. The millage is not increasing. The general operating expenses I've increased annually 2%. The personnel expenses have increased 3.5%. Due to the rising health costs, our unknowns as far as FRS, whether or not we do COLA or a STEP, and the revenues are expected to increase 4% annually for our ad valorem, and I have put a 3% increase for all other revenue streams. And I think it looks good. It looks, we could shoulder a courthouse, I believe, from the general fund.
The programmed FY20 loss projects, and as I mentioned, the Citizen Committee will meet to start reviewing these projects next month. This is just the starting point. There's public safety. That includes the radio system, sheriff's automotive, sheriff's other, fire department. That is the amount of money that's available, and I know right now that that's not enough based upon the preliminary discussions with the sheriff's department and with Major Bringman. Capital equipment is an IT piece of server equipment that we need to replace, planned and programmed replacement in our system. Public facilities is some improvements down at the South Service Center, repaving and striping of the parking lot and some roof repairs down there. Transportation and drainage is construction for the P Ridge Connector Road, and there's money set aside in that for match for Metron Estates. If we do get an HMGP grant, which we're waiting to hear on, we've set money aside in FY20 to provide the 25% match for that project. And then recreation, that is strictly ADA-focused recreation. There is additional money available in the recreation area, and we'll talk about some of those things in the capital plan. So in year 2 of the salary survey, we have a working group, Mark, Jane, Devan, and Brad Baker are working to look at positions that may need reclassification, a move to another range. As I mentioned, we were identified as about 27% on average behind the market, and the adjustments we made really impacted that workforce to about 16%. So there are probably still some fine-tuning things that we need to do, and they're looking at that. They've identified right now, in their first couple of meetings, about 24 job descriptions, position descriptions that might need to be relooked at and reclassified to a different range. We don't know what that's going to cost. So that's the question mark down at the bottom. But that is, I think, the top priority is adjusting those folks that were not fully compensated or fully addressed in the raises last year. The second would be an across-the-board raise, and there are several options I've thrown up there. A step increase would cost, if all employees were given that step increase, about $1.8 million. A cost of living adjustment to the pay table, and we assumed about a 2.8% for that figure, costs about $1.9 million. And one other option that the working group is looking at is if we just applied $1 per hour across the entire pay table. So that would focus that, you would see a higher percentage, obviously, at the lower end of our pay table with less impact at the top. That costs about 1.9. I am not proposing that we do all three of those things. I think the first priority is the reclassifications, and then we figure out financially what is affordable and how we best compensate the workforce. And I don't know whether it's A, B, or C up there, but one of those we'll bring back to you in the June timeframe. So MSTU implementation. Last fall, the board took the step at my recommendation to enact an MSTU ordinance that would allow us to levy an additional millage for the Sheriff's Department. We've continued to do research on that. We've had meetings with the Sheriff's Department about this subject, and so wanted to discuss sort of where we are with that and provide you a recommendation. One of the going-in entry points at the bottom there is that we wouldn't use the MSTU to fund capital equipment. We thought we would continue to focus the local option sales tax as the primary funding source for capital equipment for the sheriff's office. So the options that I think are available would be to fund the entire sheriff's budget with an MSTU millage rate. A second option would be to fund any increase above the current $46 million budget. We would fund that with an MSTU millage rate. And the third option would be to delay implementation until we maybe did some further study. And I say that is a viable option because the MSTU only applies in the unincorporated area of the county. The Board of County Commissioners can enact that, but it applies only to that jurisdiction. For the MSTU to apply in Milton and Jay might be a little bit of an outlier because we provide their security services, but in Milton and Gulf Breeze, the city councils would have to consent by resolution to allow that MSTU to be applied in their jurisdiction. And I don't know that that's going to happen. In some preliminary conversations, I think they have a police force that they fund through an MSTU. Both jurisdictions do. So I think what that sets up is where you would add MSTU millage rate to the unincorporated area and not to the incorporated areas. And I don't know that that's the solution we're looking for in this case. What we're looking to do is to provide transparency to our constituents and the residents as to what public safety and what the Sheriff's Department costs the county in taxes every year. So part of the delaying implementation, and one of the things that we could do, and DeSoto County just went through this, they did an apportionment study just like we did with the fire department MSBUs. You can do a similar study for the sheriff's public safety services. What does he provide in the municipalities? What does he, serving warrants, responding to high-end, crises, hostage situations, people barricaded in homes, those kinds of things. That's all the Sheriff's Department is going to respond. So there's a way to, I think, do some more detailed analysis to determine what actual costs would be applicable within those jurisdictions. And the staff that I've talked to at the cities have agreed that that would be a reasonable way forward if we wanted to take that step. I'm not here asking for that today. I just wanted to lay that out. But I think what we could do, and this came up in Jane and I's meeting with the Sheriff's Department last month in conversation, and it kind of hit me as potentially a good solution. Sheriff Johnson said when he came and spoke before you and supported the MSTU, he told me he thought he would be just like the superintendent of schools who, sets the millage rate. And I said, well, that's not how the MST works. The board sets the millage rate. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and he would be just like the superintendent of schools if we assigned a millage rate to his budget. Obviously, the superintendent establishes a budget and a millage rate and takes it to his board, the school board, for approval, and that's what the sheriff and I talked about. So perhaps we could present the budget in just a little different way in our June and July workshops. I still don't know the answer to the question that I've been asked by several of you. What can we show on the trim notice and what can we show on a tax bill? I think right now, if I asked, I would say without the MSTU, we can't show a different line. We just show the county millage rate, but I don't know that that's the final answer. I'm still working on that. I think what we can do in our budget discussions is have the sheriff's budget as a set piece and what would it take to fund that, and then the rest of the general fund as a separate piece, and what millage rate does it take to fund that, and perhaps that sets up a different discussion and decision for you all when you look at it at that light. And then also, puts the budget in a more transparent way to the public at those future workshops that we would have and those future presentations. So I think we don't have to take any action on the MSTU ordinance. It's on the books and it could be used at any point in the future. But at this point, I don't recommend taking the step of implementing in this coming fiscal year 2020.
Commissioner Salter.
Mr. Chairman, Dan, we've talked about this before, but what percentage of our budget goes to the sheriff?
Of the ad valorem tax collected last year was about 83%.
I just wanted the public to know that. Thank you.
So I think just, to take that as an example, sir, if we come to the June workshop, if you would be amenable to this sort of presentation, we would present the sheriff's budget and it would have a millage of 5 or 4.7 or whatever it turns out to be to fully fund that sheriff's budget. And then we would have the rest of the general fund budget and it would be 1.2 or 1.5 or whatever it turns out to be. If you add those two numbers together, we can all do that math in public and know that that might be more than 6.0953. So then you need to figure out, well, is that acceptable or not acceptable? And where would I reduce the millage rate? Where would I take those cuts between those two different buckets, if you will?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner
Dan,
Cole.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I just like Commissioner Salter wanted the sheriff's cost out there to the public, pointing out to the public that, our millage rate would be reduced and show it as the sheriff's millage rate. It just make sure we always keep that clear so everybody don't think, well, you guys are going to stay the same and increase him. So, thank you.
No, sir. I think that I talked with Sheriff, as I mentioned, Sheriff Johnson yesterday. He's at Orlando at one of the big public safety conferences down there, and he's very comfortable with this approach and this presentation. So as we work through the budget and he submits his budget at the end of May, and we put the workshop together for June, we would take this approach and bring you a presentation in that manner. I do want to talk a little bit about organizational priorities. Some of these have budgetary impacts or potential budgetary impacts in the coming year. Some of them I just want to seek your guidance and sort of prioritization of the board here. Code enforcement I know is a priority of the board. We've talked about that over the last several months, 6 months or so. What I propose to do actually this fiscal year, depending your direction, is to make code enforcement a separate division. In my time here, it's been under the building department. I know it was under planning and zoning prior to that, and then it was under building department prior to that. But I think it's important enough that we should elevate it to its own division and put a director in charge of it that would report directly to me, as opposed to through another department head. I would do that with an in-house move of personnel right now, but in the 2020 budget, it might mean we need to backfill a position in another department. And I would ask, I think we need to add another field code enforcement officer as soon as possible, even potentially this fiscal year, because we have a code enforcement supervisor. I'm proposing moving a director from another department and establishing it as a division. We have a supervisor who spends maybe 30% of the time out in the field, 60% of the time keeping the machine running and reviewing cases and filing paperwork and whatnot. And we have really then 3 officers who are out in the field. I would like to add a 4th code enforcement officer as soon as possible. And if you're amenable, I'll bring that to a regular board meeting.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Cole.
I'm certainly glad to hear what you just said, because I think there's been too much abuse of just, people, taking advantage of the lack of enforcement. I think we've been calling it code compliance, and I think we need to move to the term enforcement. Is your plan to also have them perhaps some sort of uniform and badged, basically to give them a little more teeth into what they do?
I think we could look at a change in appearance in the next budget cycle. Obviously, there's a lot of money to buy uniforms. I don't know that it's appropriate to wear a badge, but some identifying emblem on the shirts that's standard for the entire group would be appropriate, I think. I've also, in my conversation with Sheriff Johnson yesterday, just mentioned to him environmental enforcement, which is an issue that was handled by the county, that was transferred to the Sheriff's Department about 4 years ago now. But Sheriff Johnson has focused those resources on road patrol. He assured me yesterday that once he got school resource officer billets filled, that he could put people back to an environmental compliance role, one for the north and one for the south. But the school resource officer is a top priority, and it's a state law and a requirement that he has to follow. So I'll have some additional conversations with the sheriff on that. I don't know that we want to go all the way back to environmental officers under the county, but that, I think, is something we should talk about and figure out what the budget implications would be and what would that look like, and, or how soon could it be reconstituted within the sheriff's office. I think that's a part of code enforcement, where if we get a litter complaint or things of that nature, we send it to the sheriff's office. So there are some things we can do in-house on follow-up and whatnot to try and improve the current situation, but a lot of times that goes to sheriff's dispatch and goes out to whatever deputy is on road patrol that day into his list of things to respond to. And so we don't have a dedicated environmental enforcement unit that I think we want to try and reconstitute as part of this.
I'll just voice my opinion, as I've shared with you in private. I strongly support that initiative. I've spoken with our sheriff about this, as well as I think just through logically looking at it, we're resources that we focus here. I feel like that there'll be a return. It may be hard to quantify that, but I feel like there'll be a return as far as a reduction of things that the sheriff's office has to deal with, clearly, and I know if the sheriff was standing there, he'd have no problem saying that these structures, when they become dilapidated or eyesores, basically just trashy, it brings a certain breed of folks, and those are the folks that require more resources from the sheriff's office. And I know that it hurts our residents. I know I've heard it, as well as my fellow commissioners, from residents throughout the county in all districts, that folks that try to keep their places nice, they don't appreciate it when the other folks don't do likewise. So I would strongly support that initiative to try to better man that and better operate it. Commissioner Electric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, you mentioned and adding someone this year, in this current fiscal year, to code enforcement, and I would support that wholly. I think that's something that I would like to see us move on sooner rather than later.
Commissioner Peach.
Yeah, and I support the fellow commissioners as well, and we're talking a name change too, because it's not currently code compliance. I like the code enforcement, so yeah, I'm in favor of that post-haste.
Okay, I will look to implement those. I don't know that I will get an agenda item on for next week, but probably the following meeting we'll talk about adding a code enforcement officer and bring that request and the financial impact to you. Facilities is one that's on my mind. One, because we're in the process of building a new courthouse, brand new facility. We have facilities all over the county. Some of them are parks, some of them are community centers, some of them are municipal buildings. But I don't feel like I kind of have a single belly button that I could go to say, tell me about the physical plant, tell me about the South Service Center, and strategically, when are we going to be maxed out on space there, and when do we need to consider rebuilding? I know if I need something repaired, that I certainly call Stephen, and he puts that on it, and we get the building maintenance team out there, and something gets fixed. But what I'm proposing is sort of the start of a migration towards a facilities department that would oversee the physical plant of the county, all of our buildings, all of our structures. There would be a strategic planning element to that, looking ahead to the future as to when we need to replace those things. What's the status of air conditioning units and the life cycle on those, and all those kinds of things, as well as look at our parks and how do we add to our parks? What is the appropriate place to add sports fields, or what amenities don't we currently have that we should bring to this area of the county first and expand to there? So I don't know that there's a budget impact here. This is an organizational change that I'm thinking about for bringing into place in the next budget year. I don't see right now adding any people to this, but probably in the future as we continue to grow and our facilities morph as we move to a county complex and a county courthouse complex out on Avalon Boulevard is something I think we want to have to be better postured in the future.
Commissioner Peach.
Speaking from experience, having been that belly button a lot in my previous career, it's a key element. When you have a physical plant and you look at the value of that physical plant, you know, it has major budget impacts and huge impact on the county. So, you know, from experience, knowing it will help us, I think, plan better, budget better in the future, knowing what's up with our physical plant, what we need to look at in year 2, 3, 4 out with those physical plants. So I could say from my experience with programs and softwares out there, it's not recreating anything. It's basically adopting in-place industry and government type standards that really helps an organization. Just my input from my past experience.
Now, I just wanted to hit on the part that I know you mentioned parks as part of the resource and really just sort of recreating maybe the way we look at that as far as emphasis on priorities. And I think that would be beneficial. Just as Commissioner Peach spoke, it reminded me, you know, Navarre and Gulf Breeze, several town hall meetings, and we've heard it throughout budget workshops last year, are crying out for additional field space. You know, we had the same thing happening in the area that me and Commissioner Salter serve. We've been able to address that, fortunately, through funding with the Navy, but we know that there's going to be infrastructure costs there. So I think if we had a better way to look at countywide, here we know not just physical plants, but even from the recreation side, boat launches and other things. Here's what it costs to maintain. Here's the projection so that we can better play for it. I sort of feel that I've been in the boat that you've mentioned. It's sort of, hey, this comes up, this is damaged, and where are we going to take the money from, rather than a prevision there. So I appreciate you bringing that forward.
Okay, and then environmental is one that my thoughts, I'm going to tell you, are not even fully formulated on what the right answer might be or what the options might even be here. But I know that we have environmental aspects kind of spread around. In Roger's department, we have folks doing NPDES permits for the county. We have Roger's folks working with the Army Corps in some cases. Stephen is working with the Army Corps through an environmental consultant that we have retained. Shelley and Grants and Christopher Lindy in the Extension are working environmental aspects around the county. I think one of our success stories over the last year has been the Avalon Beach erosion control plan that we put in place with DEP. We've conducted the monitoring that they required, and we've reported. We've verified that the BMPs and erosion control measures we put in place has worked. We've closed San Juan to a one-way road and grassed that road. We've paved North 15th and that little section of San Juan going to 15th, and we've paved South 30th going into Indian Bayou. So I think that's one of the successes, but it was kind of some of Stevens, some of Shelley, some of Stevens' forces helping Shelley, sometimes going back to Roger and the Army Corps. So it seems like our environmental focus is a little disjointed. And so I just, that's something I guess I'm letting you know that I'm going to be looking at in this coming fiscal year. Do we need to make an organizational change to prioritize the environment and natural resources in a little bit different way to focus those disparate efforts right now? And then the last slide, just discussion and guidance. I think I've gotten pretty good guidance so far, and I appreciate that, sirs. And we'll see when we start getting, revenue projections, more detailed revenue projections from the property appraiser, from the state, what those funding levels might look like. My priority is those reclassifications that the working group is looking at. And the second priority would be a raise for everyone, and we'll weigh those options and bring you a recommendation on that at the June workshop. Levels of service, I think we will maintain levels of service with the one improvement, I think, where we want to add some resources right now is code enforcement, but everything else, we will maintain the level of service. That doesn't mean we're going to maintain the status quo. We want to continue to improve what we're doing and how we're doing it. But as far as the overall defined level of service, we want to maintain that. I got your guidance on the organization and capital we're going to talk about in just a second in another presentation. So I'd take any questions you would have.
I think we're ready for the capital projects and equipment. Commissioner Salter.
Mr. Chairman, let me say this. Dan, we appreciate your forward thinking, your progressive thinking, especially under the reorganization and the possibility of creating those other departments. I just want to say thank you for your forward and progressive thinking. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I tell you, when I took this job, I didn't know all the fun and challenges that there were, but it's enjoyable. And I'm very, very grateful and blessed to have a good team that supports me every day. So I would be remiss without saying that Sabrina was instrumental in putting this project together, along with all the departments. What we have in our budget is a capital improvement plan that we think we can afford and what we need to do, what we can do, I guess, with the money that's available. What I asked the departments to do, and they submitted, is what are those things that we should do and that we could do? And that list is, I don't know how many pages of spreadsheet long, long enough that I didn't make it all the way through it. I relied on Sabrina and her expertise to take that information, to distill it down into what we're going to talk about in just a few slides. But I want you to know that there is a lot of effort and analysis that went to get to this information to present to you. So I think, as we did with the budget, it's important to look at what we've done. In 2015, the additional local option gas tax was approved by this board, and that means about $2.8 million in additional annual revenue for the Road and Bridge Department to pave roads, to buy equipment, to fund the resources necessary. And then the citizens approved the half-cent local option sales tax in the fall of 2016, started January 1st, 2017, and is scheduled to sunset December 31st of 2021. That adds about $8 million annually for capital improvements to the budget. With the gas tax over the last several years, we've resurfaced or paved 60 miles of roads in the county, 159 different streets, and impacting over 3,300 residents with those resurfacings. We've been able to upgrade a lot of capital equipment in the Public Works Department over the last several years. Some gas tax, some local option sales tax, but getting that equipment up to date and in service longer, newer equipment will stay out on the road without having to be back in the shop, has made a significant difference in the Road and Bridge Department. Just a few pictures, because pilots like pictures, and pictures worth 1,000 words. Hickory Hammock and Dickerson City Road repaved. The half-cent local option sales tax that was approved by the residents, this is the amount that we have expended, that we have receipts for going out the door. As I mentioned earlier, there's an allocation plan into the various bins, and then programming that has programmed those funds against projects. But this is what we have spent to date of the local option sales tax. Shemukla Community Park was opened last year, great event. Sweet Bay Bridge, there's a little before, an in work, and then an after. That was one of our first big ribbon cutting events, and they've gotten much better and much more well attended since that first one, but no less important. Optimus Park, Pace Lane and Patterson Lane Drainage Project. That's, it's hard to make stormwater ponds look really good, but it's functioning. It's a functioning drainage system that withstood some substantial rains late last year. And as Commissioner Parker mentioned, Florida Town was just on Monday. We didn't even have time to get pictures in this presentation of Florida Town, but another great project with a significant improvement for the residents in that area. So this is what's allocated. As I previously mentioned, we have some additional capital equipment that will be purchased, public facilities improvements. That is how we're allocating the rest of the public safety funds, and then recreation and transportation and drainage. So the funds of the half-cent local option infrastructure sales tax are allocated according to the board's guidance and within the parameters. We have allocated the unallocated as well. We had originally set 5% aside, but that has since been reallocated to public safety.
Dan, just real quick, that 15.9 to the right there, that's what we've taken in to date or through 18?
To date, it lags a couple months, I think, Jane, a couple months, but that's about 2 years, so we're right on track with it. It's about $8 million a year.
Awesome, thanks.
Oh, my mic was off when I was talking. Thanks. Sorry, sir. All right, planned capital investments. So these numbers are different than what anybody would see in our budget document that's posted online, because I asked the staff and all the directors to take a look again at things that they know that are on the books, but maybe they're not in the budget document because we don't think we can afford them, because we haven't fully developed the project. So these are planning figures. They are not even numbers I would program funds against, but it gives us an idea of what is out there. And those are some pretty big numbers. I know we don't have, Jane, do we have 24 million extra next year?
I think we have that
Yeah,
much.
Jane said we don't have 24 million extra. And Commissioner Peach checked in his pockets. But the types of things that are included in this list, is the additional, continuing to refurbish the capital equipment in the Public Works Department, Navarre Beach wastewater treatment plant, some lift stations are in there, plus we have the longer-term wastewater treatment plant project to relocate the effluent out of the sound. Courthouse design and construction is included in this project, and I want to be clear that that's funded, that we're planning that in the budget, and Jane's going to talk specifically about courthouse funding in the next presentation, but we think about $3 million a year on a loan payment, and we have that planned and programmed in the budget. So we're not talking about that as an unfunded requirement.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Cole.
Dan, is something like, we've talked some about a new East Milton firehouse. Would that fall under public facilities or public safety?
That would be public safety. We've had all the fire department stuff included in public safety.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Additional sheriff's request is automotive road I talked about. The annual district road paving is in this numbers. P Ridge Connector Road, for lack of a better name yet. New sports fields are programmed in here, as well as the Navarre Park renovations. So there's a lot that is already planned. But the additional capital investments is what I kind of want to focus on. There are needs even beyond that I think are valid and justified. We've talked a little bit about the sheriff today. Going through this exercise, the sheriff submitted a capital plan for the next 10 years. That includes the jail expansion that we've kind of held off or held at bay right now with the modifications to the DJJ facility and some of the things that Major Tift is doing at the jail to try and control population and get folks out when he can safely. But we're going to have to do that in the next 10 years, and that's somewhere around $30 million to build that jail expansion, 30 to 35, depending on what the final selected design is. It could be more. For public safety, there's an additional need that the sheriff's identified for capital beyond the jail. Annually, that's in the neighborhood of $3 million. That's another $30 million for those cars and things. Public facilities, One of the things that we have talked about would be a joint public safety dispatch center. Brad is making contacts and working with the Sheriff's Department where we consolidate all those 911 centers into a single center to save those operational costs down the road. Where you could save some number of people, we don't know exactly, but it would be an annual savings every year. But we don't have a facility that could house that. We would have to build something to house that service, if you will. Woodbine Road, transportation. That's one that has been talked about. It's been in the press recently. It's one that was talked about 10 years ago. We know Woodbine Road is going to get to a failing level of service, a level of service F. Right now, I think it's in the D category, but in the next 3 years, 2022, it's projected to go to a failing level of service. We need to take action to avoid that failing level of service if we can. Additional soccer fields. We'll have an agenda item next week, working with Pensacola State College to acquire some land down there at the Midway campus and put some additional sports fields there. But that costs money. You got to clear the land. You got to put in irrigation. You got to put in restroom facilities. You got to put in parking. You got to do stormwater. That's a significant project. We need to make the improvements on the land we purchased up at the Chumuckla Soccer Park so that para can function at least with practice football out there, if not full fields. So full fields eventually, but I'm thinking about how quickly can we get to a practice field. There are turn lanes that in Commissioner Salter's district up and down that we need to add for safety along Highway 87, along Highway 89. Each one of those turn lanes is $500,000 approximately, depending on lots of factors, but that's a good planning number. One that we've talked about repeatedly is community fitness facilities. I've had meetings with the Y and other interested parties who are interested in bringing community fitness facilities back to Santa Rosa County in the Pace area, in the Gulf Breeze area. But that would be in a public-private partnership sort of way where the county may front the capital and then a nonprofit group would run the facility and take on the operation and maintenance costs, which over a 40-year lifespan is going to be 4 times what we would spend in capital up front. But those are the kinds of things that I think we hear regularly from citizens that they want, but those are the kinds of things that we don't currently have funding for. Tom King Bayou is a project that's in design. It's a drainage improvement in Holly by the Sea. It's about a $670,000 design effort going on now that we need construction funding for to make that drainage improvement on that significant drainage feature in Holly by the Sea. So I know that that is a really big number, $284 million. But that is what, based upon staff identified needs, things we have collected, things we have heard, and this is something I'll be talking about with the Lost Citizen Committee next month as well, but that is additional capital investments that we need to consider making in Santa Rosa County, and that we don't have an identified revenue source for. That's over 10 years, that's $28 million a year. Are we going to be able to do all of those things? No, but I think we want to do as many of those things as we can, and there will be a programming process beyond this planning effort to take any identified revenue and put it towards specific projects with public involvement, just as we did with the local option sales tax. I think it's something that I would ask the board to consider. I don't know what the solutions are. There are revenue sources that are available. An additional half penny is available from allowed by state statute as one option. But I'll leave that open to the board's discussion.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the presentation. I'll use this moment just to, I had a few remarks that sort of penciled in that I wanted to share with my fellow board members. Is obviously Dan's laid out the major infrastructure needs and public safety equipment I know is going to be instrumental for the citizens' safe. That's nothing new that you gentlemen don't already know. I will say, to address some questions that were asked earlier on in the presentation, I've had the opportunity to at least personally speak with 4 members that I can remember off the top of my head of our 10-member local option sales tax citizen advisory board. I've also had the opportunity to talk with our sheriff on numerous occasions, as well as the fire chief in the Pace District, and he's expressed some capital needs that aren't even on this list from equipment that's well over 20 years that is very expensive on the fire apparatuses. Looking at all that, I sum up with this statement and request is I ran for this office because I was very passionate about this community, making it better for my children's generation. And I am extremely appreciative of everything, as Dan stated, the groundwork y'all have laid to help continue that. With that being said, I've really searched and spent a lot of time, how can we continue to move that ball forward? And with that, I would like to ask the board to consider hosting a special election in August of this year for the additional half-cent sales tax, which would bring us to the 1 cent, and we could sunset that for 10 years. I've taken the opportunity to talk with Tappy about this several times. They're undergoing some state-required procedures that they have to, so they would be ready for an election as soon as August, but not able to do it sooner. I've had the opportunity to talk with numerous civics groups, whether it be Rotaries or Chambers of Commerce, about this issue for several months to garner feedback. I've heard overwhelming positive support, especially from the business community, as well as our safety officials like fire chiefs and the sheriff for what it's doing, and also for the realization of what would happen if we didn't have it. Big question that's come up, and so I want to address is, well, this would cost, Tappy said, roughly $200,000 to have a special election. And so the cost has been, well, why not wait till the next year, maybe for the presidential primary for an already scheduled election? The problem is statute states that once it's approved, it cannot begin until January 1st of a calendar year. So if we waited even those additional few months, it would cost us a year's worth of revenue if it was approved, which is approximately $16 to $17 million. And if you look at that $200,000 for that 1 year's revenue, it's less than 1.5%. And that, I think, would allow some assurances not only to those public safety officials and our citizens, but also to Dan and Jane and the jobs we asked them to do, to be able to now to forecast out for that 10-year period to start implementing some of these critical things. If the board so felt that they could support asking staff to work with Tappy's office to shore up a date, work with Roy. I know I've personally asked him. I feel that he sort of went through the checks with the state on would that, what would that look like as far as ballot language, but that would give him time to sometime next month, in the month of March, we could put it on as an agenda item to come back for the board to review the actual referendum language that I know we would have to, but it would basically look like that we would be surplanting the following January of 2020 to begin collecting the 1% sales tax in lieu of the half-cent sales tax. And from what Roy has checked on, it would in no way jeopardize the fact that if it was voted no, it would not relinquish the current half-cent, which has been approved for 5 years. But I can clearly say on behalf of me and my household, and when I look at my kids every day and trying to improve their community for when they grow up, I think this would be the clearest avenue forward, and so I would like to hear if the board would be amenable to that. Commissioner Peach.
I guess as the new guy, I'll start. To me, the plan to make that reality and show, our citizens that you've laid it out well here, Dan. If this planned capital investments slide does anything, it helps support your facilities and previous discussions. And I look at the sales tax as a choice. I choose to buy gas in Santa Rosa County even though I could buy it on base at about the same price or cheaper, because I know that half-cent, that tax is going to do good things for the community. So I've talked to folks, I've asked folks how they feel about that, and, they said, it's an option, and that's how I present to folks. If they don't want to pay it, they can go shopping in another county, but I think a lot of folks are seeing the good that's being done with that half cent. And as long as we have this laid out like we do, and we show the folks that we're being good stewards of that, I'm all for letting the people decide if they would, want to make that investment. So I would definitely support you on that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Peach. And I just want to add in from those discussions, especially with chambers and civics groups, I do think it would be important, wouldn't need to do it today if we did, again, to support staff to let them know, hey, to move forward with that. But as we move forward is to identify, they've all, I've heard a majority of folks state they would like to see a presentation and a list such as been provided today of here are the major things that this would be used to fund. It doesn't have to account for every dollar, but I can surely tell you even the groups that me and Dan have had the opportunity that have reached out about Woodbine Road or about drainage issues, if they knew here would be the things that would be done if I voted for this, I have been told would comfort folks. And again, from the members I've talked with on the local option sales tax committee and what they've shared with me, even from the public, they said, hey, the public sees that we're doing these things, and I feel like they're very supportive of it. Commissioner Colvin and Commissioner Salter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the input, and there's several of us that sat up here and wished that years ago that half or full cent had passed. We would be much further down the road at this time. I fully support moving this to 1 cent. I've talked to quite a few people, and they see what we're doing with this, and they see that we're being very prudent, as our administrator has indicated, and as this board has okayed projects. They like the fact that there's a citizens advisory committee that's involved in that to make sure that we stay on track with that. But I will support this only if I hear from other board members that we will not, anytime in the near future, add to the burden of transportation impact fees, increase in ad valorem, or and any kind of moratorium on construction. Those are 3 things that I think would lose any support we could garner for increase in that sales tax.
Thank you. Commissioner Salter.
Mr. Chairman, I fully support the 1 cent. A little bit of history, Commissioner Cole hit on it. Back in 2006, we put together a referendum for 1 cent sales tax for transportation and drainage. Unfortunately, it failed by 600 votes. That was in 2006. I met with a group in Woodbine the other day, and I told them one of the projects back then was 4-laning Woodbine. If the citizens had implemented that tax back in 2006, it would have generated approximately $160 million, which would have 4-lane Woodbine and did some major work down in the south end as well. And that would have been completed by now. We'd have had 10 years worth of $160 million. So I fully support it. I told the group out in Woodbine Springs the other day, the only way you're going to get your road 4-lane is support the 1 cent sales tax. So I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I support it as well. We have a track record now of the projects that we've been able to accomplish with the half-cent sales tax. So I think we can take that and use it to justify the expansion and the extension to 10 years. And over a 10-year period, you're looking at $160 million plus that could go a long way towards taking care of the right now unfunded capital that we need. And Santa Rosa County remains one of the least taxed per capita counties in the state of Florida, and it shows in our deferred capital, deferred infrastructure. So I would support Commissioner Parker's proposal.
Thank you. And I think, as Commissioner Lynchard and Cole specifically pointed out, this is also a huge benefit to a lot of our seniors in our community and fixed income by not having to go up on that ad valorem to support these capital expenditures. I appreciate, and again, I mean it, just like when I look at my little boys in the morning, on behalf of my family and the community, I appreciate your support because I do feel this is the best way we can address those things for the community. So, Dan, I'll assure that you and Roy, I know from previous talks, have a clear understanding of what we're looking to do, and I'll look forward to sometime in one of our March meetings having that as an agenda item to shore up those dates as well as the referendum language. Thank you. I think we can move on to the courthouse funding.
Okay, as previously mentioned, that this is just a discussion of a matter of how we're going to fund the courthouse. It's a project that the board has directed we complete. We'll bring a contract, knock on wood. I'll check my email when I get back to the office, that we have a design-build contract with Ajax in place. And the schedule they've laid out is still the one that they presented to you with obviously this time that we've been negotiating included. But to start breaking ground later this summer and have a site work and foundation early release package before the end of this year. And this is how we're going to pay for it. So I'll turn it over to Jane. And this is just a picture. Where did we get this?
I made it up.
This is Jane's drawing of the courthouse. So
This is from Ajax. I think it's from Ajax, yeah. Okay, do we have it up there? The next one. I've got a slide for y'all. Okay, there we go. You know, we based this on a cost of the courthouse of $45 million, and we would like to cover $10 million of that cost, leaving $35 million for us to finance. But I wanted you to see where we stood with our general fund. Right now, we have $3.5 million in our fund balance. $20 million of that, as you know, went for our reserves and also to mitigate risk and also for revenue stabilization. That leaves us $17.5 million for projects. And if we do take $10 million of that, we will have a fund balance of $7.5. But I wanted you all to see that in our gas and oil fund, we do have $3.7 million that we could throw towards this project, and that would give us a cushion in our general fund of about $11.2 million. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can do a bank loan or we could do a bond, and there are pros and cons to both of those. You can see that the pros to a bank loan, it's less expensive, it's not as cumbersome, it's quicker. But one of the cons to that is that we would lose our bank qualified status.
All right,
Commissioner
Mr.
Cole.
Chairman,
Yeah.
I got to stop here because I read this yesterday, and that explain that to me.
That bank,
Okay.
I knew that, I
Explain
knew
it to
it.
me, because,
That was
and here's where I'm coming from. You say we lose our qualified status for other loans. That's what I'm reading.
Yeah, that's what it says.
And that concerns me, because if we're successful in what we just discussed in moving forward with the 1 cent sales tax, to me, one of the proposals I would like to make to people to vote for the tax is that we would borrow some money and fix things like Woodbine Road. We wouldn't wait. We'd use that extra revenue for, to pay back the loan. So explain to me how, I like
Well,
the
it
fact of
wouldn't-
getting
it
a
wouldn't
lesser
hurt us,
interest and
it'd hurt
paying
the
less
banks.
interest.
It wouldn't hurt us as much as it would hurt the banks, because it was created in 1986. And it was to give smaller municipalities, that would give them access to credit. It would help them to eliminate their traditional underwriting fees, and also, but at the same time, give the banks a tax credit for that. We would still, that's what the banks probably wouldn't have the same, tax benefit.
Okay.
But they'd still, make a pretty good bit of money from us.
But it doesn't mean we couldn't,
No.
if we borrowed this money.
Right.
We could still go borrow money to do
Sure.
Woodbine Road with the other revenue source.
Sure.
Okay, I'm
That
good
was
there.
just one of the
Okay.
things. And then, and also the pros and cons for a bond. I mean, sure, we could get it for a longer term. It wouldn't impact us as heavily each year. And it would make bonding for future projects easier, but we would still have to go through all of the steps to get that. Also, it is very, very expensive, and and we pay more interest over the life of the loan. On the next slide, I'll give you a side-by-side. You can see from the bank loan, principal's the same. Our issuance costs are $600,000. $350,000 of that are underwriting cost alone. The terms, we see 15 years for the bank. That's over 30 years with the bond. I set an interest rate of 3.5. I suspect we could get it for 3. So it would look a little bit better. For 15 years, we are looking at $3 million a year from a bank loan that would hit our budget. A bond is 1.9. But the interest, we'd pay $10 million if in interest, a little over if we got a bank loan, but we would pay over 21 if we had a bond. I also, after speaking to the bond council, I do recommend that we go out for an RFP for a financial advisor that could help us with this decision. We could even piggyback on another county, but they would help us with the whole process. I personally recommend a bank loan. I think that that's what they would recommend that we do. I think if we, and counties are getting away from this. I don't think Leon County is doing bond issues anymore. There's just so much involved. Not only would we need a bond counsel, we'd have to have a bond rating, and then we'd need disclosure counsel, and then we're looking at investment firms to peddle the bonds, and our CAFR would have to be done. It'd take about 3 to 4 months, and I think with the interest rates the way they are now, another thing, should we try to do this thing in-house and do an RFP for banks? We could not do it on the level that a financial advisor could do it. They'll solicit 80 banks, and I don't think that we could. But I think we're really positioned we could do it. We could do it. So that's my report on the finance.
Commissioner Lynchard. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jane, I agree with you that it would be a good idea to retain a professional financial advisor to assist us in making this large decision. In terms of timing, when would that decision have to be made, bank loan versus bond? Because if we were to have the sales tax question decided in August, and if it were to be approved, and we wanted to accelerate those projects, that's something that we could roll into this decision as well, because then instead of a $35 million financing tranche, we're looking at 160 plus 35. So do we have to make that decision? Because we're in engineering phase right now on the courthouse, or we're not even there yet.
We're not even there yet.
Construction's not going to kick off hot and heavy for a while yet.
Right. I think with the money in the current budget for the courthouse project, and with the ability to access perhaps another $5 million out of the unassigned fund balance for the courthouse project, I don't think we would need to make this borrowing decision until probably summer, maybe fall. I haven't looked at it that closely, but I think there might be time. One of the reasons I think Jane highlighted to hire this professional financial advisor is to bring that expertise on the bonding capacity. It's not anything I've ever done. It's not anything we've done. And so how does that work? What does that look like? What do we have to commit revenue source-wise, and could we tie other things to that, as you're suggesting? So I think the decision or guidance we're looking for is to go out and hire that professional financial advisor, because the permutations and options with bonds and terms and issuance and counsels, and it started to make my head hurt. So I want to hire somebody else to have their head hurt and help us.
Yeah, and also, this would cost us between $35,000 and $45,000, I believe. And they will also look at our entire budget, and they will be able to tell us what we really could afford. It's a one-stop shop. I think we would be wise.
Commissioner Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to ask Commissioner Lynchard if he'd like to put that in form of motion.
I don't know that we would take any action today. They'll probably put it on an agenda to put together the RFP for the financial advisor.
Can we do that today? Go ahead and let them, give them that much.
We can give staff direction
Direction.
to put it on the agenda. We don't necessarily need a motion to do that,
Okay.
though, I don't think.
I think one of the things we'll look at is if there's a county or municipal contract that we could piggyback that has the appropriate clause that would allow us under state statute to access a financial advisor without taking the time to go through that financial, or that RFP process. We will look at that as an option, but then if we need to bring an RFP, we'll bring that back to the board for approval before we release it.
I just want to note, so that it's clear for anybody out there that may be confused why we would consider this when the interest is more, because I'll say I'm smart enough to listen to people smarter than me. I think even though when I first looked at this, I'm thinking, why would this even be an option? And maybe that's that Dave Ramsey mentality flaring up. However, when you look at the magnitude and the scale of this is less than 1/100% of the cost of this project. And to do that, to be able to make an educated decision, is why I will support hiring a professional on that. It's not just to be willy-nilly, but again, when you look at the percentages, it's an extremely small percentage to make sure that we're properly handling $35 million worth of funding. So I appreciate you bringing that forward to us, and I'm going to get you a stool next time. You got to stand next to this guy so you look a little taller here. So thank you so much.
But if we did go with the bond issue, a financial advisor would be required. So,
Do any other members of the board have any questions or comments about the presentations that's been put forward today? And I do want to echo, I think Dan put it out there, but I do want to echo, we appreciate what Sabrina's done, as well as the other ladies in the staff, and Henry. I know he always gets left out, but I know these are huge things for y'all to tackle every year, and I know this is just the beginning, and I look forward to moving forward. But I think I speak for the rest of the members of the board when we say thank you so much for not only your hard work, but your passion to truly do what's best for the citizens there. Commissioner Cole.
Thank you. It wouldn't be fair to say that the current administration has raised the bar, because I think every administration that we've worked with has continued to raise the bar for the citizens of Santa Rosa County. But with the growth that we've seen and what I've seen of these presentations over the 16 years now that I've sat up here, I think perhaps a nicer way to say it than a comparative way is that you've shifted it into high gear. I mean, this is truly a very well done presentation, and I want to thank you very much for doing so. It brings it down to an understandable level. Sometimes I get a little confused in the financial world, but I thank you for the work you've done on this, both of you, all of you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Salter.
Mr. Chairman, I echo what Commissioner Cole just said. I have to say this. I think what Dan and Jane and Sabrina and everyone else has laid out for us today, looking into the future, goes to show that the most expensive thing you can do is nothing. And nothing has caught up with us. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to public forum. If we have anybody that would like to speak, I would just please remind you, if you have not already, to fill out a speaker's form for the clerk. And when you approach the podium, just state your name and address for the record, and please remember that we do have a 3-minute time limit that'll be enforced. Good morning. Thank you for coming.
6256 East Bay Boulevard. I'd like to speak to you about the financial problems of the county, and I think one of the solutions would be the 1-cent tax. I would support that, but in addition to that, I think we need impact fees in this county. The reason for that is that we're one of the few counties that doesn't require that. Our Tourist Development Council was created to bring people here. My wife was the first director. I went to a lot of meetings, And at that time, the sign at the Bar Beach said, Florida's best kept secret. Well, it's not anymore. The number one industry in this county is that we are a bedroom community for Okaloosa in Escambia County. And with that comes problems with growth, with traffic problems, more sheriff's deputies, everything they've talked about this morning that increases the debt on the citizens of this county. The flooding, which is apparently unsolvable in some situations. Development is a washout now for this county. So if you're going to have any more development, make the people that come in here pay for it. Pay for the roads, pay for the cops, pay for the schools, and the things that we have to have. I think it's only fair to the citizens, it's fundamental due process, that you come to the age that we're in now where everybody else in the state requires this. I got this t-shirt from a friend of mine in the Keys, Mike Osborne. Went to high school with him, my best friend. He wants to move back up here. He can't get out of the Keys during a hurricane. The evacuation problems are just beyond repair there. And then they got the problem the other day in the paper. They said, well, we're going to stop letting people use sunscreen because it's killing the coral reefs. Well, I called a judge buddy of mine down there that's retired. He'd also like to move back. And he says, that's just a joke. They're not going to sell it downtown in Key West, but the tourists are going to bring it in. So we need to do something about our environment, which was part of this group's presentation. And also in the morning paper, we know there's a case pending before the U.S. Supreme Court on pollutants going into water that's going to have an impact on whatever you do with the environment. Little by little, the development in this county has had a regional impact upon the entire area.
Mr. Kellum, if you would, just bring it to a close.
All right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'd like to give a thumb drive to Mr. Peach. It's a drone drive over the Heather's Place and that whole area down Bergen Road. I spent too much money on them to buy any more of them.
Thank you, and we appreciate you coming today.
And I think your new courthouse lacks dignity. It doesn't meet my standards of what I'd like to walk into.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak today? All right, hearing none, we're going to adjourn the meeting.